The bill now heads to the Senate, where groups of Republicans are pressing for extensive change. Lawmakers plan to vote on approval by August. With more, we head to Capitol Hill and to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg News congressional reporter Erik Wasson. Erik, what are the Republicans in the Senate pressing for? What's the extensive change they want to see?
You know, the biggest one we're hearing this morning is the green energy tax credits. In the last minute changes in the House, those were the expiration of those credits were moved up. There is some exemptions for projects that get underway within 60 days of enactment. But, there's going to be a real bite to both renewable energy companies and the big banks that have funded these programs through tax equity plans. So, we're really seeing a pushback on the Senate side. There's going to be extensive changes. But if you do that, that does drive up the deficit impact. We're also seeing, it's going to be a tough tough road for Majority Leader John Thune to get this to the Senate, because you have moderates who are nervous about the Medicaid cuts, nervous about the cuts already in the bill, and then you have more conservative members like Ron Johnson, who's saying he wants to rip this whole thing up and do $5 trillion in cuts. He probably won't get that, but he's really drawing a hard line. He wants the SALT deduction changes out. And anything that the Senate does then has to come back and pass the House, which has this tiny margin of 3 that they can afford to spare. So it's going to be a really tricky battle in the coming weeks and perhaps months in the Senate.
Speaking of battles, hang on for a second, Erik. We did mention earlier at the top of our broadcast, reporting from the New York Times, talking about the United States halting Harvard's ability to enroll international students. We've got another headline on this, and the United States saying that the current Harvard international students must transfer. Again, developing story. We're on it. We're going to keep bringing you headlines as it is known. Having said that, Erik, there is a lot going on in D.C., and I just do wonder, in terms of this increase for the U.S. federal deficit, this is something that we are continuing to see investors keep an eye on. Things have calmed down a little bit today, but we're looking at a $4 trillion increase in the U.S. debt ceiling. Congressional fiscal hawks, are they okay with all of this? I know you talked about some of the changes that might come through on the Senate side, but I'm just curious how they are seeing it, congressional fiscal hawks.
Well, I think it's really important. You see Russ Vought, the White House budget director, and others sort of claiming that the math works out because, you've got a $4 trillion tax revenue loss. You've got, 1.5 to $2 trillion. We don't have the final score in spending cuts. And then they claim 2.6 trillion in growth will make up for this. But reasonable budget analysts, even right-leaning like the Tax Foundation, say those growth numbers are just plain wrong. When we saw members streaming out a conservative fiscal hawk like Chip Roy and others, they say they agree this is going to add to the deficit. It doesn't do anything to reduce the deficit. And the Senate has much more run room because they're doing an accounting gimmick that assumes all the Trump tax cuts, extending them, cost $0 when it actually costs $3.8 trillion. And that gives them room to add even more in tax cuts. We're talking about making tax on tips, tax on overtime, and others permanent, which will just drive up the cost of that. And again, as I said earlier, their appetite for spending cuts is less. So we could end up seeing this being $5, $6, even $7 trillion in deficit on top of the deficits that we're already running.
Given that, Erik, do you expect this bill to become law?
I do expect it to become law. As we saw, the fiscal hawks talked a big game even until the last minute. But when President Trump got involved, called them to the White House, they folded. Trump is the ace in the hole for congressional leaders here. He can convince wayward members, and he's extremely popular in the party at this point. There are going to be changes. I think that bond markets should expect it to go right up to the debt ceiling limit. There's going to be some drama, some jitters, but in the end, it will pass, probably in a different form than we have it at the moment.